Hey, welcome to the sixth round post fight show for UFC Dublin. This is Zane Simon for BloodyElbow.com. Uh, Here to do a quick recap of the fights for what was, I don't know. I mean, the crowd kept it lively. Fight Pass kept it short. All of which made it not a terrible UFC event, but it was certainly a bit of a slog. Of the 10 fights, probably only 4 of them were really much fun to watch. Not much in the way of meaningful action, so you really have to depend on exciting fights for a card like that, and these were not very exciting. Unfortunately, especially with well matched opponents, a lot of guys put on really, even winners put on some unexciting fights. Fortunately, if nothing else, the main event was a pretty good fight. Louis Smolka, Paddy Holohan. They had a pretty good back and forth bout. Holohan really pushed the action, really tried to press Smolka. I don't think he had a very smart game plan, frankly, trying to press Smolka where Smolka is best, which is his transition wrestling and grappling. Holohan really seemed like he wanted to make this a ground dogfight and really try to out hustle Smolka on the mat and get the sub. But in part, that's a really tough way to try to beat Louis Smolka. He's a great scrambling grappler. And also, in part, Houlihan just seems to have a tendency to try and press fights, press a faster pace than he can maintain, which is especially tough to do at flyweight. But he starts out, going 100 miles an hour, and by the time the end of the third round has come, he's slowing considerably. So good, solid win for Smolka. He continues to push past his really disappointing loss to Chris Carriasso and show continued improvement, continue to show that he's a really tough, hard fighter to outwork. And for Holohan, this is kind of a little bit more of a crash back to reality. I hate to say that, but beating Von Lee and Shane Howell are really not that meaningful wins for the UFC. His win over Josh Sampo was a nice highlight to start his UFC career, but as he's starting to test more experienced, bigger, stronger flyweights who have a very polished game, who have a consistent game, he's struggling. Chris Kalides was able to just grind him out on the ground, and Smolka was able to out hustle him and outwork him. So unless something really changes for Houlihan, I kind of see him having trouble breaking out into the top 15 of that division. And at that point, when your division's only 30 fighters deep, if you're not getting to the top 15, you're probably not going to have a really long shelf life, which is unfortunate, but just kind of the nature of the game. Co-main event, Norman Park, Reza Madadi for a while. For 2 rounds, it looked like the best performance of Park's career. I mean, that saying that Madadi is coming out of a long layoff following his arrest and prison stint. So, Park looking great wasn't necessarily a major surprise, but it's still nice. But in the 3rd round, Park just gassed hard, really looked like he had nothing left. Still managed to win the round in my eyes and in the eyes of 2 of the judges, which kind of tells you just how rusty Madadi looked. But it doesn't build much further interest or hype for Park, who really should be hitting the prime of his career. He's kind of seen some weird struggles lately where the more he's tried to advance his offensive game, the more problems he's had maintaining a strong style of fighting. He struggled against Tibau and Trinaldo, against bigger, stronger guys that he couldn't push around in the clinch. And then with Madadi, I mean, he was doing well. He was doing his thing. He looked great. His footwork looked sharp. His boxing looked sharp. His takedown defense was on point as usual. But it seemed like he wore himself out following his own game plan, and that's not a great sign for the future for Park. I don't know. He got to win. He stays alive. He stays relevant, but it's not the kind of win that's going to really get somebody really excited and pumped up. Probably the best fight of the night, at least for me, and I think it was the best fight many expected going in, was Darren Till, Nicholas Dalby. I'm really happy the judges got that right. They scored it a draw. Dalby had a fantastic third round, apparently after dislocating Till's arm in the second. Really poured it on Till, did everything he could to get the stoppage, couldn't quite do it. But I think it was really a reasonably I think it was a well scored 10-8 round from the judges. And I mean, for me as a fan, it makes me happier all around to see that kind of fight, because I have, notably, if you watch the vivisection, pumped the brakes on Darren Till and said that he's not a guy that we should be that excited for yet. But I I think this fight revises that feeling upward for me quite a bit. Till looked fantastic against Dalby early. Looked like he was striking with a lot more venom and a lot higher output in his hands, working a lot harder. Came really close to finishing Dalby. He's big, he's tough, he's hard to take down. He's got the style to back up his power striking, and that is very exciting to me as a fan. And if he injures his arm really bad and then loses late to a much more experienced vet, that doesn't say bad things to me about his future. That seems like, kind of, not to equate Dalby to Carlos Condit, but kind of the or the Rory McDonald loss for Carlos Condit, where he was doing great for a lot of the fight and then just got beat up late. And we still saw McDonald, he didn't win the title when he fought Robbie Lawler, but he was still able to continually improve his game and continue to grow in the division to become a real title challenger and somebody who came close to winning a UFC title and having a title around his waist. And the line between being a champion and being a challenger is razor thin. So I could still see that in Till's future. I don't know that he'll ever be a belt holder for the UFC, but he's got a style that he can grow and improve and become a much better fighter down the road. And for Dalby, this just continues to show that he's a borderline top 20-ish kind of fighter. He's tough. He works at a high rate. He's skilled everywhere. And if you don't knock him out, he's going to be right in there fighting you until tooth and nail until the very end. So good fight all around, fun fight, and it keeps me excited and invested in both guys going forward, which is always, I think, a bonus. To open up the main card, Neil Seery put on a pretty good war with John De Los Reyes. Not an amazing fight. Reyes was pretty much outmatched from the beginning, but great win for Seery. Reyes, I think, is just one of those guys who has all the athletic talent to compete at a very high level, but just hasn't got the consistent training over his career to be a high-level fighter in the UFC. Once Seery was able to get his timing down and figure out the kind of power that De Los Reyes was working with, he got a much better beat on the boxing, was able to out-wrestle him, was able to out-hustle him on the ground. Kind of think that fight, along with a couple other instances, showed some of the, I don't know, showed some limits to Dan Hardy's analysis. Not to rag on him a little, but he was just absolutely sure that Reyes was going to have a big advantage over Seery in the grappling. And, Seery ends up submitting him. And if you watch tape on De Los Reyes, you see that his biggest asset is really as a power puncher. And Seery has never been a slouch of a grappler or wrestler or striker. He's a well-rounded, good fighter everywhere. He's just not necessarily the most elite athlete who, when he meets really skilled, singularly skilled opponents, can just dominate them. So we saw him struggle with Smolka and guys like that, who, Smolka, like I say, has that great transition wrestle grappling, and Seery was willing to just kind of dive into Smolka on the ground and get outworked there. But De Los Reyes has never shown the ability to do the same kind of things that Smolka does. But that's not a major knock on Hardy, just kind of one of a couple instances where he really went on for a paper narrative over the fight that was actually going on in front of him. Starting up from the bottom, Gareth Mcclellan opened the card with a TKO win over Bubba Bush. Not a great fight. not a couple. Neither guy looks like they're really going places in the UFC. McClellan has showed that he's tough enough to gut out wins at the lowest level of middleweight, and Bush unfortunately just shows that he doesn't. For as good a fighter and solid prospect he looked like on the legacy circuit in the U.S., he just doesn't have the defense anywhere in his game to fight in the UFC. Good offensive fighter, but when the tables get turned on him, doesn't have a lot of tools to get off his back, to block punches, to stave off offense. Unfortunately, that fight was marred by McClellan being allowed a major fence grab on a takedown attempt from Bush that put McClellan right into mount and changed the whole complexion of the fight. I don't think that McClellan shouldn't get no credit for the rest of that fight because Bush couldn't get off his back, and that's a major problem for Bush. But it did change the fight a lot when McClellan was able to just get that fence grab and land into mount. Darren Elkins beat Rob Whiteford. Pretty standard Darren Elkins decision. Just stayed on Whiteford, outworked him all the way through. It shows exactly why Elkins is a borderline top 15 fighter. He's just absolute quicksand in the cage, tough to hurt, stays constant in his aggression, has a great variety of takedowns. And I think, really to typify exactly who Elkins is in the cage, at one point, Whiteford hit a really fancy judo toss, looked great. But the moment he lost control of Elkins, the moment Elkins hit the mat, he just whipped right around and was in on a low single and in on Whiteford's hips, just absolutely immediately grinding away for the takedown. And that's just exactly who Elkins is. You have to stay on him. You have to keep physically punishing him, and you can't give him room. Whiteford couldn't do that. It's kind of unfortunate for Whiteford in that he's getting to the point in his career where he's got to start, if he's going to make any kind of run in that division, he's got to get these kinds of wins, and he just couldn't do it. He's entering the prime of his career, and I'm not sure how much higher his ceiling is than the borderlines of the top 15. So it's kind of a bad loss for Whiteford, frankly. Tom Breeze absolutely put it on Cathal Pendred. I can't recommend going back and watching that fight enough. Just 1 round, 4.5 minutes of absolute domination, like by Breeze. Looks like the absolute real deal as a welterweight prospect. Has shown since he's moved to TriStar, his striking is just getting smooth as silk. And for a guy like him who's 6'3" and not, he's not as wide as somebody like Rumble or someone like that, or even as Pendred, frankly, who are these other monsters down at welterweight, but he's not a stick thin welterweight. Just, reminds me a lot of Brandon Thatch at that point with that kind of frame where he's just huge for the division. And the fact that he's a pretty good wrestler and grappler and becoming a much better striker every time out, and he carries some real power in his hands, makes him a scary prospect for the division. Somebody who has the camp behind him that I expect to see him improve a lot, and has shown that, more than anyone, even, more than John Howard, who's a very experienced vet, has shown that he can absolutely dominate a stalwart, run-of-the-mill fighter at welterweight. Cathal Pendred is exactly the kind of baseline gatekeeper test that says, if you can beat this guy, you really have something special. And especially if you can just dominate him, you have something special to offer the division. So I expect to see Breeze continue to climb and climb pretty quickly at this point. He's got a great set of skills, and he's got the camp behind him to improve a lot. And that was just a wonderful win for him. After that, Krzysztof Jotko beat Scott Askham in a grind of a fight. It really could have gone either way. Jotko looked really improved on his feet. Askham showed some real problems leading striking exchanges. He tends to extend way out over his feet. Leaves himself open to get countered, leaves himself open to get taken down. had a lot of problems adjusting to Yatko's aggression and striking. But at the same time, Yatko doesn't have that much power, doesn't have that much real raw physicality to his game. So even when he was able to outwork Askham a lot and bust him up a little, he could never really quite turn the fight in a way to clearly dominate it. Got pushed around in the clinch a bit by Askham. Just a close, ugly fight. Unfortunately, asks some real questions of Askham, who a lot of people had some expectations for. And Yako looks improved, but it also feels like the kind of thing where he's going to have to put on a lot better fight than that to really move up at 185. So I don't know. A fight that kind of takes a little shine off both guys, unfortunately. Ashling Daly defeated Erica Almeida in a women's strawweight fight. Solid showing from Daly. Almeida seems like she's just not ready for UFC competition, frankly. She had some highlight moments where she was able to land some knees in the clinch, dive on some takedowns, land some more solid offense than Daly at times, but she just also made some really bad fight decisions. Doesn't have the experience, doesn't have the fight IQ built up over years yet, and I would be happy to see the UFC throw her at another low level opponent to see if she can keep improving quickly. But otherwise, it just seems like she's not ready for strawweight yet. A couple years from now, she could have beat Daly, but at just this moment, Daly got a good, solid veteran win, kind of thing that keeps her as a divisional gatekeeper, the kind of fighter that young prospects are going to have to beat to prove themselves against and prove themselves ready for the top 15 at 115. And the main event of the undercard, what ended up being a bit of a disappointing fight between two fighters I like a lot. Stevie Ray beat Mikel Lebout. Um, I don't know. It wasn't a terrible performance from Ray. He just kind of coasted to a win. Frankly, he had Lebout physically outmatched, but he never and landed some real power shots throughout the fight. But he never put the kind of volume or aggression on Lebout to really take the fight. And as the fight wore on, Lebout got more comfortable trying to pressure Ray, but doesn't have the natural pop in his hands uh, or the wrestling ability to really hurt Ray or to take rounds from him. Ray's got the natural physical gifts. He's got some of the skills to be a very good fighter at lightweight, but he had somebody in front of him that he was physically stronger than and just didn't seem like he was really willing to pull the trigger and try and put the fight away. Just coasted to a relatively straightforward win. Doesn't dampen my expectations that Ray could improve a lot, but it does. I don't know. He's going to have to fight better than that to be a top 15 talent, basically, because Lebout is a fun, actiony, just grinder kind of fighter. The kind of guy who's really going to make people work for wins, but the kind of guy that a top 15 caliber talent at lightweight should really be able to show off against and do more than Ray did. So I don't know. Not not a stellar performance from Ray, not an awful performance from Ray, just not something that's really going to get anyone more excited in him as a talent in the division. So that said, you really end up with Breeze, Siri, Till, and Smolka as your exciting winners of the night. Those were your really only exciting fights of the night. Everything else was pretty missable, frankly. And the crowd buoyed the card along a lot. The Irish fans were great. They cheered almost everything, and showed some great homerism and generally carried the card to make it seem more exciting than it was, but very missable otherwise outside of those four fights. And unfortunately, as fan, with a lot of prospects and a lot of young fighters and a lot of fights where fighters had something to prove, not many proved much. The only guys that I think really ended up looking, the only guy I would say that came out of this really looking like he made a major leap forward in fan expectations is Tom Breeze. Darren Till looks like a more impressive prospect than ever, but getting hurt late and getting beat up late by Dalby, getting the draw, it's not going to light the world on fire. Breeze is the guy that really came out of this card looking excellent. Everything else is just kind of a wash to me. So, not a terrible card, but if you missed it, you didn't miss a ton. Anyway, if you enjoyed this recap, give us a thumbs up. That's the thumbs up button. Subscribe to MMANation.com. Find me over on BloodyElbow.com. You can find me on Twitter at DZaneSimon. We'll have Knuckle Up coming for you. If I Did It, MMA Prospectus, a host of our other content, Three Amigos podcasts, all of our great stuff. Even though there's no UFC event next week, we'll be covering everything else in the MMA world. So tune in. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And thanks for following along.